Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to TEFAF Afternoons. I have to say, as a producer, this is a wonderful sight, even though I know it's not wonderful to be having standing room for the people standing, but it is terrific to know that there's so much interest in this program. So I hope you will be compassionate and understanding as we bring in a few chairs, but not enough for everybody. I'm sorry. We're a little chair underprivileged. So we're bringing in a few. So you can think of this, as I said, the ethical dilemma of who stands and who sits. And I leave that to the democratic process for the people in the back. In the meantime, I would like to introduce TEFAF Afternoons to you. This is the 6th iteration of public programs at TEFAF New York. It started in fall of 2016 as TEFAF Coffee Talks in the Restaurant. And we only had 5. We now have 10 programs. And because we have this gorgeous dedicated space, we're also using the afternoons as a new way to begin to explore a lot of topics and areas of discussion and even contested areas of discussion that we weren't able to do when we only had the 5 sessions in the morning. So this is TEFAF Afternoons. We're delighted, absolutely thrilled to have this afternoon Niche to Global, the art market's recent evolution. And we have Evan Beard, who is National Arts
Run the art group at a private bank.
Right, yeah, I think most of you know who he is even, so he really doesn't need introduction, with Bank of America Private
Bank, yep.
And a fantastic array of people, which Evan himself has assembled, so I expect this is going to be a terrific and fast-paced conversation. Be thinking of your questions because we will have a Q&A at the end. I must mention also that the discussion is live streamed on Facebook, and then we'll be on Facebook for a while, and then it will be on our website. So if there are 1 or 2 bon mots that you miss during this conversation, you will certainly be able to find them online following. Okay, thank you so much for your consideration. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Liza. Anything you say will live on. So thank you for coming out. Great crowd here today. We're going to look at something, we're calling it Niche to Global, and we're going to look at one question, and we're going to answer hopefully several of your questions, but how the heck did we get from this little kind of ecosystem that used to exist on 57th Street and down in Soho. When the 1973 biennial at the Whitney happened, they actually had a book of prices in case you wanted to buy the works off the wall. It was a tiny little group of collectors and old line, gallerists and dealers that would come together every couple years to suddenly, you all, many of you are on Freeze or Freeze a couple days ago. You were going to dinners this week with trapeze artists. We were all packed in here yesterday at TEFAF. You'll all fly off to the biennial and then go to Basel, and suddenly $1.5 billion worth of art's going to be auctioned off in the next week here in New York City. We have folks coming to us putting credit facilities so they can do third-party guarantees, and they're putting interest rate hedges and currency hedges on those deals. So we're going to look at what did we turn into and how did we get there. I got a great panel. Gary Tinterow, director of the MFA Houston, one of the great museums in really the world, an amazing Impressionist collection down there. Michael Shnayerson, you've probably read a few of his books, writes for Vanity Fair, just published this really fun, actually not yet to be published, Boom, Mad Money Mega Dealers and the Rise of Contemporary Art.
Published today.
Oh, today? So in fine bookstores anywhere. And then Francis Beatty was with Richard Feigen Gallery for many years, lots of stories, and now is a great collector and advisor in the art world. So I guess we should start. What did you see, Michael? You've written biographies on many interesting folks. You cover culture and gossip for Vanity Fair. What attracted you to the art world, and what did you see that suddenly you said, there needs to be a very thick book about it.
Well, thank you, Evan, and it's nice to be here. I'm not an art critic or academic, so you might well ask what I thought I was doing writing a book about contemporary art. And you know, the truth is, as a journalist, you sort of buy this idea that you can look into anything. That's your license. And I was intrigued by really what you started to say, that, you know, back in the late 40s, there had been a few dealers and artists. There was a scene, and somehow that became what we have today. How did that happen? I sensed that there were a lot of marvelous stories there. And I wanted to write a book for someone like me, actually, someone who knew something about contemporary art, could get a kick out of the latest show at the Whitney, but really actually didn't know that much and would like to know more and would like to learn about it in a sort of entertaining way. So I set out, and I almost immediately made a terrible mistake. And the mistake was that I got a contract, and I set out to write the entire history of contemporary art starting in the late 40s. And I realized in a few months that this was not a good idea. There was a reason why no one had done that book. It was really hard and maybe not even possible. I had to winnow this down. I had a contract. I couldn't turn the contract back. How could I do that? And by then I had done some research, and I realized that you know, you can't have art without artists, but you can't have art without dealers either. And that at every chapter of this story, this 70-year story, dealers were at the center of it. So I decided they would be my way into the story.
The star of the book is this gallerist. No one in this room's probably ever heard of him, Larry Gagosian. And he really becomes the star of this book because it was a complete new breed that came into this space. And what attracted you to him, and why? How has he changed the game a little bit?
Well, I'll be honest, I love Larry Gagosian because he is great material. And because the turning point from Leo to Castelli to Gagosian is really maybe the most critical one. I say that in sort of loosely, but certainly Castelli was the reigning gallery head of pop art and on through minimalism. And certainly Gagosian came in just as the 80s were beginning. And of course, with his sort of aggressive, sharp-elbowed way, was a complete contrast to Castelli. And no one thought the two men would like each other, but they did.
In your book, you say Castelli was an artist-centric gallery. Gagosian is a collector-centric gallery. Larry collects collectors.
Yes.
Castelli collects artists. And Francis, you've been in this game for a long time. Was there a moment where you saw that this shift was from the artist-centric art world to the more collector, deal-making-centric art world?
Well, I actually knew Leo quite well, and there were a lot of people in the art world who were a lot more aggressive than Leo. Leo was curiously able to play with everyone else, and he once said, "We're wholesalers," because he had so many other galleries that he'd represent all the artists. The artists were very loyal to him, and he would send them out to other galleries to sell, whereas now the mega galleries have galleries of their own in all those far-flung places. The monetization of art, which is the subtext of all of this, for me, happened in 1987 when Alan Bond bought the irises at Sotheby's at auction for $41 million. We were all like agog. But even more agog was the fact that we discovered a few months later that Sotheby's had lent him $20 million to buy it with. So, I mean, there was a great deal of discussion from then on as to the fact that people were now investing in art, the banks were investing in art, and I think that has, it's halted sometimes. I mean, the art market, after the stock market crashed and burned in '87, the art market kept going till 1990 and then really fell dormant for a while. But I think that was a...
Van Gogh's irises, the end of that story was, Alan Bond, who had this art loan from Sotheby's, it gets auctioned, he gets the painting, and, the crash you talk about, he ultimately his real estate empire goes belly up and he's unable to actually pay for the work. So Sotheby's takes the rest of his collection, sells it off, sends irises on a world tour, and ultimately sells it to the Getty. You could see it's probably the best painting in the Getty's collection in Los Angeles. But Wall Street took notice because they said, wait a second, Sotheby's is lending money against art. This is the great unlevered asset class. We lever your cars, your homes, your divorces. We lever everything, but art is completely unlevered. And I think it's introduced a new breed of collector, a new type, and it's added a lot of liquidity. So Gary, your perch on all these great institutions, from the Met to the MFA, how has it changed for you, the relationship with the market and the collector over this time period?
Well, there's so many different interesting ideas to grasp there. One is that, first and foremost, museums aren't speculating in the art market. So we participate in the art market in various ways, direct and indirect. And sometimes museums go out and buy contemporary art from dealers, from artists, or at auction. That wasn't always the case. And not so long ago, there were many large municipal museums in the country that had bylaws that prohibited them from purchasing contemporary art works by living artists, even exhibiting works by living artists. All that changed after the Second World War, and it was that prohibition that gave rise to institutions like the Whitney and the Museum of Modern Art, because there was a strong desire on the part of collectors and dealers in various communities who wished to have an outlet for the exhibition of that which interested them. And as Michael was saying, dealers are at the core, but when I look as an art historian, history of art and artists, for a great artistic reputation to occur, you need both an artist, something, compelling production, an art dealer who is willing to promote it and has sufficient assets to promote it, and collectors who are there, who are partly providing the assets that the dealer is using in order to promote that artist's work. It's also nice if you have a critic, and it used to be essential to have a critic like Baudelaire with Delacroix or with Manet, or we can think of all the 20th century critics, Vaucel and others, who were helping Picasso and Leger, the Cubists, rise in the early 20th century. The critics now have a much less powerful voice than they once had, and now I think almost all domains, and the internet has pretty much killed that.
Did they have a voice at all?
Yeah, they have a voice, but everyone's a critic now,
yeah,
and everyone can publish. And so I think that factor in terms of reputation, it used to be, a critic could close down a Broadway show. I don't know if that's true anymore, but a critic cannot destroy an artist's reputation, cannot kill a gallery show, cannot kill a market for an artist.
How about Jerry Saltz? Can't he do that? No, seriously.
He's influential. We all enjoy reading his, his column, but I'm not sure that there's that strong effect on the market. I think the dealers have someone like Gagosian, Hauser-Werner, et cetera. They all have a much greater impact on the market, and then of course the auction houses now have a huge impact. I remember a good friend of mine, Thilo van Watzdorf, was in the late 1960s, 70s making the first sales of contemporary art at Sotheby's, at Park Burnett.
Yeah.
They didn't sell that stuff. Yeah. So it's a very different world and economy in which we live.
When, if you go up the street and, Aristotle's contemplating the bust of Homer at the Met, when that came on the market, the question was, would it be the National Gallery, or would it be the Met, or would the Getty, or would the Louvre buy it? Now, when a great Kuhn's Rabbit is coming up at Christie's, it's going to make 50 to 70, maybe more. No one's asking what museum's going to buy it. Is it hedge fund manager number one, or private equity executive number two,
or Saudi prince,
or Saudi prince, or Russian oligarch,
right,
or
let's just pause and say that Jeff Koons's Rabbit is not equal to Rembrandt's Aristotle. I think,
except for price.
I think that is something that happens a lot, in which people think because something goes for a huge price, that therefore it is really good. And before, when Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer got the huge price, everyone knew it was really good. So I think that we have to be very, very careful not equating quality with price.
You take the rabbit for the MFA.
I'll take it. I think that is one of Jeff Koons' best works, and I think it is a great work that will last into the age.
Fully canonized?
Well, I don't know if it has been fully canonized, but I think it has terrific staying power, and it has, it has.
You mean staying power in the market or staying power as
No,
art?
in art history. It has, Jeff is a brilliant artist, and he, in that work, he embodied a lot of characteristics that you can go back to find in other great old
But this
master art.
idea, you have a very nice endowment, but you're still priced out of the market.
At that level, 50 million, yeah.
But how does
It
that
would take a
change your
few payments over
relationship
several years.
with your collectors, your trustees? Are you suddenly, is there a different, we've watched with the Dallas Museum of Art partnering with many collectors across their collecting life. Has your relationship to the market and collectors changed as an institution?
Well, I don't want to speak so much about my institution because we're one of the few institutions that luckily has this fantastic endowment, the Caroline Weiss Law Endowment, that gives us a huge amount of money every year. Every July 1, the tank is refreshed from that enormous endowment to buy contemporary art. So I think we have the largest single endowment fund of any museum in the world just to buy modern and contemporary art. So that's different. So there's a microeconomy for every museum and community of collectors. But obviously, museums are not, and even if it were Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer by Rembrandt, we couldn't come up with $50 million tomorrow, to purchase that at auction. There are very few museums in the world that can do that. The Getty, of course, is one of them. The Met every once in a while. But to me, the more interesting question is how can museums, especially museums that are not specialized in modern and contemporary art, how can they participate in the art market, and how do they edit and form their collections over time as we receive gifts and bequests and are entering the art market ourselves and buying works of art at different levels, and at different points in artists' careers, and we begin to accumulate all this material. What then happens? Because private collectors, of course, can refine their collections over time and can change direction and can do other things. When something enters a museum, it's pretty much there for a very long time, and we also have a self-imposed prohibition against selling works by living artists. So that means in museums that are actively acquiring modern and contemporary art, there's this huge balloon. So we go 5,000 years and then for the last 20, 30 years. And what is that going to look like 100 years retrospectively?
Before I move to Michael, has or as a voice from the institutional space, your opinion on deaccessioning in museums, views on deaccessioning, do you feel it's evolving?
I think things are changing now, and in part having to deal with storage and also just the long-term care of all these collections. And what is the value of a collection that's perpetually in storage? It's not good for anyone. It's not good for the artist, the community. So I think we have to find better ways of dealing with it. But I do want to say that we are living in a golden age. And if you look back, where many of us here are Europhiles, you look at, the Netherlands, Antwerp, the 16th, 17th century, you look at Italy in the 14th, 15th century, 16th century, you see these great bursts of activity, art, monuments being built, and we cherish them. And I think we are living in one of those moments.
So Michael, he made an interesting point. Wherever we saw bursts of economic innovation, the invention of banking in Venice during the Renaissance, you had a great art market. You had a great art ecosystem. The Dutch Golden Age, when international trade and the stock market was invented, the joint stock company, you had a Dutch Golden Age in art. You look at Paris and London in the 19th century with international banking, and here we are in sort of the center of the economic world where we have a robot. So this idea of art following capital, what has given the rise? Is it an economic issue that has given rise? We just have more stratified economy, or is there something cultural that has driven, very status conscious people to come into this market more so than a generation ago?
Well, obviously it is socioeconomic. I mean, it's not just financial. And, people who get to be at a certain level of income or fortune, art is one of the only, if not the only things they can buy, very expensive art that is unique, that's going to confer the sort of grandeur upon them that they seek. So then you have to look at how many of those people there are. Well, there are currently about 2,000 billionaires, I think, spread over the globe, and there were almost none, back when Forbes, began doing its list in the mid-'80s. And these are people who are all buying art. And not only are they seeing that as a good way to spend their billions, but they are becoming members of this club, this global club, which I find very amusing, because I think of clubs as almost defined by having it be hard to get in.
Yeah.
But that's not the case with the art club. All you need to do is write a check.
Right.
And go to a Basel, an Art Basel or Art Basel Miami, and you've got a lot of new friends, and they all want to sell you more art, and if you like, you can just start traveling around the world and seeing them.
So
that's
Francis,
sort of what
I saw
fueled this.
Francis's face shaking. You didn't quite agree with you could be in the club. Maybe at least on level one.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. You have to buy good art.
Yeah.
If you're going to go and buy
It's
a
easy
lot
to buy
of
good
bad
art. It's
art.
bad art.
Rembrandt.
And it's not. I mean, I'm not saying The Bunny is my favorite Jeff Koons, but still. At any rate, I think that first of all, there are a lot of people who have a great deal of money who can buy whatever they want. And there are certain people that decide to buy art. I just think it's interesting. And there are a lot of other people who buy planes, yachts, islands, all kinds of things, and don't buy art. So I have to say that the people who really, really buy art, buy it because they really like it.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that a lot of people are now buying art because they think it's cool, and because instead of somebody talking to them about how good it is, people say this is hot and it's going to go up next month. Or they say, I know this is good, but does it have any traction? Is it going to, appreciate in value next, 6 months from now?
Right. That shift to the markets-driven collector is
the
interesting.
shift is very, very different, and I think quite perilous. And one of the things I was going to ask Gary is, it seems to me there are a lot of art collectors who are they're not listening to critics. They're making the market in the artists that they believe in, and they are collecting what they believe in. And it used to be that a lot of collectors asked museum directors, asked Bill Rubin, were led by curators. And I think that a lot of them are not so led by curators, and then they want to give you a whole collection that maybe you want half of and maybe you don't want the other half.
I think eventually most people who, most collectors, most people who are spending large sums of money, and it's after they've decorated their houses, and they're continuing to buy, inevitably will rely on advisors. And the advisor could be the dealer. And as we know, many collectors have benefited enormously from the wisdom and experience of dealers. And that's always been a great collaboration. And often curators or museum directors, who usually are curators, contribute to that conversation. So there are very few art collectors I know, even when they're impulsive, who don't also rely on advice, expert advice. And it's just like investing in everything else. You can't always go with your gut.
So is there a self-fulfilling prophecy? We see some dealers are very good at placing an artist's work who becomes hot in the right collections. Many of these collections will either become their own museum or get bequested to an important museum. And I mean, that canonization process from these market-driven collectors, these markets-driven kind of deal-making gallerists, are we in this era where the market is making important art, or will there always be sort of a winning way out as we try and figure out kind of what's the important influential art of this period?
I mean, there are going to be so many artists that are going to be completely forgotten.
Yeah.
We have to understand that. For
Was
better
it
or
always
for
that
worse.
way? I mean, look back at an issue of Art Forum from the 80s,
Yeah.
and you don't know any of those artists.
Precisely.
So what are you looking at when you go to Frieze and realize that most of the art hanging on the wall there, I hate to say it, may go to zero. I mean, it may go to zero over time. What are you looking at to determine this will be influential, this has staying power?
I mean, you have lots of criteria that you use. First of all, if you're, alas, old enough, and you've had a lot of experience, you know, you feel like you're loaded up with that visual information, and you look at something and you say, is this really sending me? I always say, is this sending me someplace I've never been?
Yeah.
My son then says, you've been everywhere, Mom, and that's why you don't like anything. So, I mean, somewhere in between, you know, and I think also different people have different eyes for different periods.
Yeah.
You know, people have eyes, and if you want to have eyes for contemporary art, you talk to someone who's really thinking and
What about you,
looking
Gary?
at that.
I mean, to put the MFA's, you know, brand behind a young artist, a living artist, how do you determine?
Well, I mean, we have a beautiful new building, the Kinder Building, which is opening in October 2020, and we've been making a number of acquisitions, at least since I've been there 7 years, for that building. And so we're thinking of our displays, we're thinking of constellations of works that will have an impact, that will dialogue with one another. And so there are very specific pockets that we want to fill, and lists of artists, et cetera. You can only do what feels right now. Nobody has a crystal ball. There's no way that we can anticipate what our galleries will look like 100 years from now. But so you do your best now, and you try not to spend, you know, you try not to speculate. And if you feel that suddenly an artist has doubled, tripled in prices in 2 or 3 years, you know, that's not the time to enter that market.
But what's your criteria? What are you looking for? Is it gallery representation? Is it influence of other artists?
Yeah, I mean, it's so complicated. You know, we have, for example, on one floor of our new building, we're going to be telling stories. One of them is about the city and urban life. Another is going to be about constructive art in Latin America, you know, in the post-war era. So there are different stories that another one's about identity. We're going to be filling out all these stories. We're buying a lot of works by mid-career African-American artists right now because it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, these are artists who have compelling things to say. So too do artists from the Middle East. I mean, there's something very strong. There's a strong message. So we're attracted to the compelling message, to the creativity. Whether we'll continue looking at it in 50 years, I don't know. And my criteria for all, as my curators know, and they've heard it a dozen times, is: are you willing to look at this every day? Is it going to go out in the gallery? Is it going to stay there? And are you willing to look at it every day for the rest of your life? And if so, we'll buy it. But we're not buying it for storage, and we're not buying it for rotation. We're buying it because we really believe it has something compelling to say to us on a daily basis.
That's interesting. We'll come back to identity. Michael, so let's shift to the future. So we've come into this global economy. The art world's globalized. $62 billion worth of art is sold. You have mega galleries. You know, an interesting component to your book is the art market trying for the first time in its history these gallerists to institutionalize themselves, so it's not just, you know, the charismatic founder. In the future, do you think this art world will always be this 19th century model of charismatic founders, or can the Gagosians and Zwerners and Paces of the world create real big, long-lasting businesses?
Well, they certainly are all thinking about it. Larry especially, because he's the obvious one who doesn't have a successor. There was an interesting story the other day. He's just hired a couple of people, I think, to sort of
Andrew Fabric
possibly be his successors, although it's hard to imagine him really handing over the reins. You know, my colleagues here know that there's almost no such thing as a second-generation gallery. I mean, it can happen, but it's really rare. It may be happening at the Pace Gallery now with Arnie Glimcher and his son Mark. But, you know, we won't know that. It sounds sort of macabre, but we won't know that until Arnie's gone and Mark takes over the gallery, because he may just find that most of his artists leave. They were there for Arnie, not him, even though he's a great guy and I admire him and I think he can probably bring it off. But it's a very difficult thing. And so now that we've got a market which is so hugely, exponentially greater than the markets of a century ago, the stakes are just that much greater, and it seems to me that much less likely that that the second generation can kind of make it work by pleasing all those artists and continuing his father's career.
What do you think, Frances? The music's going right now. Do you see it continuing, or do you feel like we're in a...
as usually the voice of the good old days, I'm actually not sure about this. I think there might be a sort of complete change, because what I see in some of the galleries, I mean, I happen to share a building with David Zorner uptown, there are so many people in positions of authority. This person deals with that artist, this person deals with that artist, and not that David isn't incredibly charismatic and powerful, but I think that a gallery like that the way is learning how to run itself so that also he does have successors, but to run itself so that there is an infrastructure that might not just collapse when the dealer dies. And it used to be it would collapse, but now I see there are all these galleries, all bricks and mortar all over the world, and there are people, stakeholders in those galleries. And if more of these galleries they'll be more like partnerships. And I think
that's interesting.
that because what a lot of the artists seem to be looking for, it used to be, they wanted Leo to be representing them.
Right.
But now they feel they want a wider market, a global presence, they want to be taken care of, artists have gotten used to an entirely different
And sometimes several galleries
way of being
at
treated.
once, or-
So
Richard Prince at one point had 5 galleries in New York.
Yeah. I want to pick up on this point, the relationship between the museum and the gallery. I've been struck, all over the Upper East Side, there's these amazing shows in all these commercial galleries with so many works lent by museums.
Right.
Can you talk, Gary?
I could, but I want to pivot and respond to pick up on Francis's observation, and that is, I think this goes without saying, but I want to remind everyone that while collectors often can benefit extraordinarily from a great relationship with dealers, and we should all listen to what dealers have to say because they put their money behind their decisions, and that that focuses the mind. But curators and museums we're not collecting dealers, and so we're buying individual objects, and we're pretty indiscriminate. We don't care where that object is coming from. Yeah. Is it from this dealer, that dealer, second-hand dealer, first-hand dealer, at an auction? We don't mind. If we know exactly what it is and we want it, we'll just go buy it. So the aura around the object coming from a specific gallery is more or less irrelevant to us as purchasers, museums, not to the creation of a reputation. So I would say galleries are more important to the artists than they are, say, to museums as institutions. But all this talks to the issue of branding, and that, I think, is what has changed. And so when you initially contacted us and talked about asked us to define when did this modern era or this contemporary era of the huge explosion in contemporary art develop and why, I can't point to a specific moment, but I want to talk about this phenomenon of branding. Yeah. And we were talking about succession. Ambroise Vollard, a great art dealer, and pretty much the sort of archetypal art. Castelli became a modern Ambroise Vollard, for example. Didn't have a succession. The brand was not able. But Chanel was able to survive after Chanel, right? So you have a brand, and with enough intelligence and money, you can keep it going. I'm not exactly sure if that brand adheres to the individual works of art, which ultimately are the commodity that are being sold.
That's interesting.
So that's why I think it's difficult to anticipate the future.
I didn't mean at all that the artworks were because people would buy them because they come from Zorner or Castelli.
But many people do.
But that is true. But the key thing in the contemporary art market is to get your hands on the really good artists and to keep those artists happy.
Yeah.
And my point was that if you want to keep your empire going, you have to hang on to your artists. Right. And the way of hanging on to them has sort of changed from just that one-to-one, the dealer and the artist, to a whole other area of how you service the artist, which means he might stick with you as opposed to jumping ship.
Yeah. But to finish my thoughts, so this branding thing and taking it to contemporary art, I think one phenomenon that is very strong today and helped create this pervasive globalized contemporary art market has to do with branding and the interesting coincident of, and I think it probably starts with Warhol, of high art and low art, fashion, celebrity, publicity.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not going to name names, but a lot of contemporary artists whose work, you know, reaches the highest auction prices these days often are trading in those waters of celebrity, sort of pop imagery, and there's a fashion component as well.
There's a certain type of buyer behind it as well.
Well, it's something that in the French say, you know, passe-partout. It's something that is a universal language, and whether you're a rich African or a rich Asian or a rich Russian or a rich European or American, you understand the art. It speaks a universal language, and as a commodity and as a luxury good and as a status symbol, it succeeds.
All right, I want to do some quick hits before we go to questions. Rank them in terms of importance in art history 50 years from now. Cause, Koons, Hearst.
Koons, Hearst, Cause.
Cause,
Koons, Hearst.
I'd put Hearst at the bottom.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Okay. Do you want to go on the record, Gary, or no?
Absolutely
No? Do you think all of them will have a place in the canon?
No, art historians study forgotten artists.
Yeah.
So, but I used to keep a screen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the storeroom when someone was promoting a new hot artist, say, already in the canon, these works are good, time-tested, et cetera. I would say, let me take you to my storeroom and show you the screen of paintings that were in their day, the most expensive painting, ever seen. And they're not on view. They're not of interest to us at this moment. But they might be of interest in
Massenier's Friedland at the Met.
Yeah, that has its, But anyway, but their taste is cyclical, but it does come back. And I think the key factor there in the cycles are artists. So, Jasper Johns helps us look back at Picasso. Picasso helps us look back at Goya. Goya helps us look back at Velázquez. And they have, like, sort of Chinese ancestor worship, this ability to haul personalities into the future. A great artist can bring predecessors and make them compelling to us today.
We saw a few works, both at Christie's and Sotheby's, make staggering numbers, works of art produced by AI. Are you buying or selling AI art?
I mean, first of all, I'm definitely not buying it.
All right, there you go.
But that's because I'm totally incapable of doing that. I mean, that's not a sort of judgment question. But I think that Gary's right. We don't have crystal balls, and you have to, sort of consider very seriously. I think also you have to consider the artist, the whole production of the artist. You can't just look at a picture and say, oh, that's a good picture. You really have to know what that artist is about, what he's doing,
Sure.
and evaluate it that way. And I have to say, because you've said, is it good or bad? There are a lot of nice things about, the global art market. It brings us a lot of people together. Everybody can understand the knowledge, and you can maybe talk to Koreans and South Africans and this, that, and the other about a common subject. But the thing of, instead of somebody walking in and saying, teach me about this, of them coming in and saying, how much is this going to go up, is not a good thing.
Yep. No, I agree.
It's part of, it's a difficult thing to navigate, and it certainly dominates a lot of conversations.
Art made by algorithms, silliness, or potentially something interesting?
Well, to be honest, I don't know art by algorithms.
Okay.
Is it experiential, or is it?
No, it's literally, Christie's, if you all saw, did a work of art that was like an average of all these portraitures in history created by this algorithmic program. It had a 10 to 20K estimate and sold for $500,000 at auction. So
I didn't know that, and I wouldn't buy it. Just now that you've explained it to me, it's a no.
And I'm not saying that we wouldn't exhibit something like that. I mean, that's just interesting. But you say it's, AI, but the AI was created by humans, so it is a human production, and you're just using this intermediary of formulas.
all right, can't say Houston. What's the next great art city? People have said Berlin. People have said, is there a pass? Anyone? A place where you're finding an interesting ecosystem where there's young artists, new galleries?
Those things are not going quite as together as
You got
they
a room
used
full
to.
of people that travel the world.
Berlin, was a place where there are lots and lots of artists went there, but there's very little commercial activity there. I think it is a global world. There are lots of things happening. I would say wherever you're going, dig them out because there's something really good. But above all, go to Houston next year.
Yeah, there you go.
After October 23rd.
I would put LA up there. I mean, LA Freeze seems to have worked.
Yeah.
I realized well in my book that I needed to pay attention to LA, that it wasn't just a New York story. It goes up and down, and it's seemed down for the count before, but it always seems to come back, and it seems at its most
LA has
interesting
these hypercycles,
iteration
and you
now.
make that clear in your book.
I'd like to just throw in something, and it shows you our Northern Hemisphere orientation, Sao Paulo. So I was just in Brazil, an extraordinary art scene, huge scene of collectors, very successful galleries. The Sao Paulo Biennial is terrific and honorific. But that is an art scene because of years and years of duties, sort of government control, where it's difficult to bring works of art or things of value across the borders into Brazil. They have a very rich and active art scene inside the country that only rarely jumps over the border. So someone like Lydia Clark or Tunga, et cetera, have an international reputation, but there are terrific artists who have very successful careers there, and there's a whole ecosystem that is thriving. And we had a panel, the Houston Museum of Fine Arts just had a panel in Sao Paulo talking about, what is that phenomenon of Brazil having such an effective art world that we can't quite, historically, let's say Argentina doesn't have to the same degree today, and how these protective barriers, these duty barriers, both create and also inhibit the international commerce. It's fascinating.
And you've taken a great lead. The Latin American department at the MFA with Mary Carmen Ramirez has really taken the lead in the art world of sort of reevaluating the history of Latin American art, really at the leading edge of acquiring it, and I think the art world's taken notice there. Last thing before we ask your questions, technology. The art world, I think, is interesting from a technological perspective on how it has been almost unaffected by technology. Its model really is, walk this fair. There's not, it's people looking at tactical, tangible objects and, having a handshake and buying. What technology can actually...
ArtNet. ArtNet totally changed
okay.
the entire art world.
Comparables.
Yeah, comparables. For better and for worse. For better in general, because now we don't have to look through all those books
Made it
that
tough
we
on the
used to
dealer,
look at. And when you say it's made
Yeah.
it's tough on the dealer, I actually far prefer it, because I think that first of all, we use it enormously, dealers. We use it, we find out what's been bought in, what's been sold at auction, and we tell our clients to use it. And I'm also a collector. So I love ArtNet, but the thing about ArtNet is you have to realize that a postage stamp picture of a painting, I was trying to explain to a Chinese collector, I gave him 20 photographs, little things of Sicily, same 1874, practically the same scene, the exact same size. One of them went for bought in at $400,000 and one went for $4 million. So you have to understand that you have to figure out at any, is that Joan Mitchell the best one or the worst one she painted that year? Picasso is the prime example. He could just do anything and then something brilliant.
So price transparency is pretty new, and it's had a big effect on, whether dealers can source at auction and then flip. Is there a technology, Instagram, digital?
Well, I was just going to say, you didn't mention Instagram as far as technology. To me, it seems to have changed the experience of being in the museum or in the gallery, and it seems to be the way, the filter through which so many people view art. And the question then is that for the better or the worse? And my initial reaction, just as a reporter doing this book, is that, God, it's hideous. It just, and I've read curators say the same thing. I think now I feel more equivocal about it. I mean, first of all, there's a lot to be said for extending this image or for multiplying it all over the globe to one's followers. That there's now not just Instagram as a way of looking at art, but Instagram art.
I think Instagram has become a huge it's had a huge impact on there. It's the art world central square. Dealers show new works, collectors, when they buy a work at auction, even the auctions now sort of announce new acquisitions, new consignments. I follow many of you in the room on Instagram, figuring out what you guys are up to. Gary, any technology that you think
Well, I was going to say, but I don't think it means the death of museums. And so, in quite the contrary, museum attendance in many museums around the world is the highest level ever. Now, it's true that everyone inside is on their phones, but it is a way of having that experience. And also, it's a way of bringing that experience with you, and later in the day, or next week, or next year, you can go back and look at that experience. And so, yes, you can say that it's somehow modified, but people still want to be together, even if they're together on their phones, ignoring one another.
Has it affected your curatorial? I mean, is it Kusama mirror rooms every 6 months now?
Well, that's different. If we're talking about, time-based media and digitally enhanced art, or, immersive art, experiential art, that's one new classification. I mean, it's been there for a long time. Gesamtkunstwerk is the concept has been around for a while, and we used to call them cathedrals, and now we call them capillary wrist. But it's the same thing. You go in and you're enveloped and transported. So I don't think that is new. It's just the vehicles are a little different, and the technology is different, but the experience, I think, is similar. But what is interesting is, and it's in my seat now as a museum director and looking at budgets and thinking about my IT budget and how are we going to buy the new servers and the new software and all that. The good thing is I always reconcile myself to the fact that so long as we have electricity and staff, we can open up the museum and people can come in and experience art. Yeah. And even without electricity on the top floor, we can experience the art. If you're Chase Manhattan Bank and your computer fails, you can't be in business, but we still can. And so that analog experience, being in the presence of works of art made by mankind the last 5,000 years, there is something special about that remains compelling.
So with that, thank you, Gary. We're going to open it up to questions. Hopefully someone in the room disagreed with what one of us had to say. Right here, question right here. We're going to wait for the microphone so they can hear you on Facebook.
Wonderful. Hi, I'm Marlisa Gardner. Just wanted to introduce myself. Thank you for coming today. And I did have a couple questions. One being that on the subject of the internet and social media, new platforms, marketing, do you feel any of this has hurt the master's market industry at all, brought forward many different fraudulent types of works?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is.
So the impact of social media, Instagram on the old master's market, has it had an impact, both in terms of maybe
Devaluing works.
Why would they be devalued? Because they're. I mean, Rembrandt didn't get devalued by being on cigar boxes.
Well, maybe
I'm not exactly
has it
sure.
shifted the action to more contemporary, more Instagrammable art?
From being a niche, which is something we were addressing, it's harder to obtain, out there for everyone to bid on, and actually it becomes a little less worth what it once
You mean
was.
old masters become that?
Well,
Yeah.
masters or, because.
I'm
the-
sorry, old masters and
Oh,
modern.
okay, because I was going to say, just as a digression, the new paradigm was established by Andy Warhol. The more art you make, the more it's worth. It used to be, the rarer it was, it got very high in price, but if you think about the artists who have the largest market, you think of Picasso and then Warhol, who have the hugest amount of production. In terms of the old masters, maybe Gary has a view of that. I don't think the old masters are really out there that much. I mean,
Oh no, it's great. You know, the Google Art Project, which has super high resolution images from museums around the world, it's an extraordinary resource, and we're always amazed to find references in Instagram elsewhere. A lot of people go there and find fabulous things, and they might modify the images and, you know, and use that to illustrate whatever it is.
yeah, I mean, I don't think that devalues them, actually. I remember going to a Madonna concert and thinking, oh my God, she's been looking at Jericho's raft of the Medusa. It's true. She looked at German Expressionist paintings, she looked at all of these things, and Lady Gaga does too. You can see all these references to, you know, older and older art in a lot of their productions and shows.
Another question? Alexandra? Alexandra just wrote a book, by the way, called The Bouvier Affair on the great Leonardo da Vinci that sold for $450 million, so go find it.
And a lot of other paintings. There's a Da Vinci book, but this is the story of the men with more detail.
Nice.
And Evan's in it, so. The conclusion is where we are now, which is what's the next question? Where's the story? Where's everything? But where's the painting? I mean, the Da Vinci painting. I don't have that answer in my book, so spoiler alert, I guess. No, my question is about talking about art cities. As you said, the network of cities is so global already. What are the components that define and set apart a city in that channel of connection?
That's interesting. What ingredients do you need to make a real art city?
Artists, dealers, collectors, museums, writers.
In capital or no?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Restaurant.
Yes.
But no, I mean, what was fascinating is, in Beijing, is it called 789 or 798? 798? 978? The district that was a former armament manufactory outside of Beijing that became the arts district. So there were artists living upstairs, there were dealers opening up downstairs, there were cafes. You need that concentration, and especially I think for, when we think of the Village at certain times, Soho, Chelsea, you think of Montparnasse and Montmartre. In order for a great artistic community to develop, there needs a place for them to interact. So you need a neighborhood.
Does it matter what the governance structure is, whether you're in a democracy, a dictatorship, or
Well, a lot of good Chinese art began to come out even under the authoritarian regime in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot less art when you don't have freedom of expression.
Yeah. I think that makes sense.
Different kind of art.
Yeah.
You still have to decorate the dictator's palace.
Yeah. Right.
We'll do one or two more. Anyone? Up right here up front. We'll wait for the.
Hello, my name is Gene Seidman. What about gender and race? About museums? A lot of times you go to museums, and historically it's been a lot of white men. The art has been from white men. And I'm wondering, as you think about your new collection in 2020 at your museum, Gary, how are you thinking about globally and women and gender and like that?
Back to identity.
Yeah, no, I think actually in the last few years, I mean, probably since I've been there, we've bought more works of art, whether photographs, drawings, sculptures by women artists and by men. And many of my curators are women. We have a lot of curators of color, and so we also have the huge Latin American project. We've been buying a lot of Asian art. So I think that tide has turned. That museum curators and directors, and I think even dealers too, are very self-conscious about implicit bias, and we're looking to expand our vision, and that has been terrific. It's eye-opening, it's exciting, and there's so much more opportunity there.
I have a question on that. So a lot of art, I was out at LACMA for their Collectors Weekend, where this is where they get all their new acquisitions and bring it in front of the board. And I was struck by each curator as they were sort of giving their pitch to buy this work. The pitch was almost entirely biographical. This artist, their ethnicity, gender, they overcame these barriers, etc. Very little about the actual object. And we very much are in this age of identity. How much will the art lose its identity in biographical context over time? When I go and look at Caravaggio, I see a great painting. I don't look at a guy who killed a man at one point in his life. Will this art will it keep its biographical context, or will it, over time, the art's going to stand on its own 2 feet, regardless of what the race or gender behind the art?
Well, I think I want to go back to the brand, the notion of brand. So we happen to have a Van Gogh exhibition up at my museum right now, and we've seen an overwhelming response. The Van Gogh brand is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's got a song, and it's got, mental illness, suicide, struggle, beautiful paintings, bright colors. Someone against all odds, the romantic artist myth lived out. Of course, it's important that the art be fantastic and really compelling, but to have all of that aura is what somehow communicates to a broader public and not just connoisseurs or lovers of French 19th century painting or whatever. So I think that, Caravaggio does have a brand. Rembrandt has a brand. Vermeer has a brand. Velasquez has a brand too. But so I think the biography, it's the success and the nature of the art itself, but I think the makers, Eva Hess, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
Louise Bourgeois, yeah.
Well, we're looking, I definitely, I'm not sure whether you're saying, does it stand on its own 2 feet, which means, is it just a formal object? Because one of the great things that's changing about the way we look at art is we are looking at it with lots of different lenses.
Without a doubt.
Completely. And I went to a lecture the other day that Karl Kusaroff gave, who did this big show on the American landscape and ecology. And he is a very famous professor of American art, 19th century primarily at Princeton. And he did this huge show, and he said, we started to look at these pictures from an eco point of view. What were these people doing? How were they interacting with the environment? I mean, had they just decimated all the buffaloes and actually ruined the environment? And, whereas they're sitting up there on the top saying, yay me, and, the poor Indian is below looking pathetic. Now, we know that this picture should not just be looked at as how good it is compared to, how the light is, how the landscape is, how all of this is, but it has a huge amount of context. And I think that the context now is, including the biography, is part of the way we are informed about a work of art, and it'll be carried forward. I think the day is over when people just look at something with a very, very narrow lens.
Thank you. Gary, Michael, Francis, thank you so much. Thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.
I want to thank you all again, and I appreciate Gary putting in a plug for the 11 a.m. Panel we had this morning on Vincent van Gogh. So please go and have a look at that on Facebook. Look at your cultural brochure. There's more to come. Thank you so much.